Good morning. Yeah, how you doing today? Get some rest last night. I tried to. And we're back at it again this morning. And thank you again for the opportunity to have a little bit of extra time to dig into some of these concepts. Like I said the other day, we're not going to get through all of the material, but we're going to try. We're going to try to get to as much of it as we can, but we've got to make sure that we treat the stuff that we want to cover properly and with enough care. So I'm going to do a real quick review to get us kind of caught up to where we left off last evening. We've looked at now a couple of three of these practices, the practices of proactive people. And if you want your life to make a difference for Christ, these are the practices that it would be good for you to put into place. I apply the same principles to myself. The first one was establishing the paradigm. And establishing the paradigm was looking at the models, the roadmaps of our lives. If we see frustration, we know that frustration is what? It's the fruit of the wrong paradigm. And so we've got to look inward at first and say, hey, what can I change? And every change that comes about in our life follows a very predictable pattern. It starts out with a basis of knowledge, and knowledge is that thing that dispels fear. And knowledge quickly gives way to what? Knowledge leads to discovery. All right? Follow the outline. You can look at it if you want, all right, on page 7. All right? Knowledge leads to discovery. Discovery needs to give way to then ownership. Very good. And ownership eventually creates a new practice. We are habitual creatures. We like our practices. God designed us that way, and so that's a good thing. But the biggest obstacle between discovery and ownership is what? It's pride. It's just good old-fashioned, stubborn, stiff-necked. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to admit I'm wrong. I'm going to go over the cliff with my pride intact. Pride. All right? And I've seen more than a fair amount of people that are very adamant and they're very strong-willed about their pride, but they're not going to give in because they have to admit that they're wrong. What a shame that is. You know, James chapter 4 and verse 6 says, God is opposed to the proud, but he shows grace to the humble. And the Lord will spend as much time as it takes. It may take your entire lifetime. He's not on the same time schedule that you are. He'll take your entire lifetime if he needs to get you to that place where you humble yourself. And so some of the opposition, some of the frustration that you're facing in life may be because God's opposing you. If you're proud, God will oppose you. And you won't get past that opposition. He won't relent. He won't let down. He won't back off. He will simply oppose you. So if you're experiencing frustration, it's the fruit of the wrong paradigm. Let's make the change that we need to make. And first of all, we have to establish the right paradigm. Second of all, we need to practice number 2, which is to learn what's at stake. And honestly, in this day and age, it's a little controversial to say there's more at stake than how you feel about it at the moment. There's more at stake than how you feel about it. Many of us believe, and we've been trained, we've been taught that if you feel strongly about something, then it must be reality. Not necessarily so. We need to learn what's at stake. And we did that exercise where we listed a whole bunch of core values and virtues, character qualities. You've probably never done anything like that in your entire life. I've done it a number of times now because I go through this course, but I started you out with honesty and integrity, but we listed things like love and mercy and compassion, honor, commitment, courage, respect for authority, respect for the law, respect for other people's time, respect for others, respect for stuff. There's a lot of things that we can have respect for. Responsibility, justice, consideration, diligence, dependence, all those things. And it was quite an extensive list. We probably put 20 things on that list altogether. There's another one. And turn to page 8 with me, please. I want to add one more thing. It came to me last night, and I thought we didn't mention it yesterday. It needs to be on our list. Write in trust. Write down trust on that list of things. By the way, if you break a bond of trust, how long does it take to regain it? Anybody got any ideas on that one? Is this something that's easily done? I think we know from experience, and usually experience the hard way, that to regain a bond of trust takes a long time. It may take an entire lifetime. You may never regain that bond of trust. And so trust is very, very important as a core value, as a virtue. So we need to learn what's at stake. Then we looked at the motivation model real quick, and we discussed the difference between the love of virtue and the fear of punishment. I wanted to finish that discussion. There was something I left out of it in a hurry yesterday. But there are two basic motivators in life, the love of virtue and the fear of punishment. And we said that the fear of punishment is only as effective as the individual's love of virtue. Now, what I don't want you to walk away with is this. I'm not advocating that we get rid of the fear of punishment. The fear of punishment is a very effective short-range motivator. And so with my children over the years, I have used the fear of punishment as a short-range motivator to build into them a deep and abiding love of virtue. Does that make sense to you? All right? And as parents, you're going to do the same thing. Your parents did it with you. Hopefully, you're going to do it with your children if you love them and care about them. This institution will do the same thing. I'm not advocating getting rid of the discipline system here at Clearwater. It has a very effective role. But its effective role is only as effective as the love of virtue that you bring to it. So if you ever get into a situation where you've got to go see somebody and they pull out that first little stick and they whack you with that little stick, it's supposed to make a connection with something that your parents, your peers, the Bible, the Word of God, something has placed in your heart so that you walk away from that first episode and you go, I am never going to let that happen again. I am so ashamed that I did that. You know what? I'm going to get my act together and I'm moving on from this. I don't ever want to have that episode in my life. But if there's nothing on the inside, if there's nothing in the moral conscience, if the shelves are kind of empty, that stick isn't going to make a connection with anything. Now we've got a problem. We've tweaked that fear of that discipline system so tightly now that we're not getting as much out of it as we used to. It's not as effective as it used to be. In the Navy, where I teach this course, they've got a very effective discipline system, but you know what? They tweaked that thing as tight as it can go, and it's not having any more effect. Why? Because the love of virtue isn't there like it used to be. That's why we're spending time teaching back into the love of virtue. We're teaching back into the why question of life instead of the why not question of life, all right? So that's how the love of virtue and the fear of punishment work. They're two sides, opposite sides of an equation. And then we ended up last night with practice number 3, preferring proactivity and rejecting reactivity. And I hope that this was a good illustration for you. I've got the 2 trees back up here again, taking a look at the difference between the fruit of reactivity and the fruit of proactivity. Now, I know that word proactive is overused, but it does fit here. It has an application here. And as you can look at those 2 trees side by side, the question I left you with last night was this. Which one of those best describes you? You know, it's real easy to look at that and say, oh, Steve, I know a bunch of people that are really reactive. Boy, have you described so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Yeah, and you know what? There's lots of so-and-sos out there that the reactive tree describes. But the first and most important question is, what about you? Which one of those does describe you? When I shared with you that story about the gentleman I worked for that brought me into his office and told me, Steve, you don't have to like it, you just have to do it. That's what he was trying to describe to me. He said, Steve, once you take on a job and you do it, you're brilliant at it, you do a great job. But in that first 2 minutes that you go off and you let everybody know how you feel about it, when you're highly reactive, when you're angry and you're hostile and you're sarcastic and you're bitter and you're all those things that are on that reactive tree, you've built a reputation for yourself that you don't deserve, but you know what? It's yours to own now because you did it. And in that first 2 minutes, you've done yourself a disservice. How many of us, in that first 2 minutes, kind of blow it? We blow our testimony. When really what we want to be is we want to have the fruit of that proactive life. We want to be problem solvers. We don't want to be finger-pointing blame assessors. Now, is there ever a place for finger-pointing and blame assessing? The answer to that is yes, there is. On 9/11, terrorists attacked and buildings came down, and that was a tragedy, but it was a lot of different failures all put together. The very first thing they did as the buildings were coming down was not to put together the 9/11 Commission to figure out what went wrong. What they needed to do was get people out of the rubble, get the rubble cleaned up, make sure everybody was okay, and then later on down the road, they placed a commission in place in order to finger point and blame assess, and that's exactly what they did. It comes later on down the road. Many of us, the first thing out of our mouth is, well, why did that happen? Who was responsible for this? Well, what's that all about? Many times that's not the first thing to do at all. It should be the last. All right? So, reactivity and proactivity. Now, as we look at those 2 trees, and we're going to pick up with this discussion this morning, what's the difference between the 2? I think the answer is this. It's simply a choice. It's simply a choice, isn't it? Yeah, I shared with you my story about being upset with Mrs. Scheibner, and she and I were having an argument, and then the phone rang. At that moment, she's making a choice. At that moment, I'm making a choice. The difference between being that reactive person that you don't like and that proactive person that you want to be is a choice. And that's your choice. And you've got to own it. See where we are in that change? You now can see it. You know what you ought to be. You've discovered where you are on either one of those trees. Now you've got to own it. And the only thing standing between you and owning this is pride. It's pride. So that finishes up on page 10. Let's turn to page 11. All right? We're going to jump into something new now this morning in the time we have left. I want to introduce you to the fourth practice, which is the core of our course now. It's consistently elevating virtues above feelings. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about raising the standard and what that looks like. Well, elevating virtues above how you feel at the moment is a way that we raise the standard. And we don't do it in the big things of life. We do it in all of the little things in life. All of those little moments that take courage. All of those moments where we feel like gossiping about somebody else, but we bite our tongue and say, you know what? That's none of my business. All those times where we feel like, hey, you know what? Everybody else does it. What's the big deal? Why can't I get away with it? It's those moments where we elevate the virtues of honesty and integrity and love and respect and compassion and responsibility above how we feel about it at the moment. So this is a very important dynamic for us to get in touch with. I want to take you to a place that I'm naming the Moral Mart, all right? And that Moral Mart is a place that resides right in the middle of us. It is our core. It is our moral conscience, if you will. And I want you to picture in your mind one of those giant box stores. Not hard to do. They're all over the place. You know, it could be a Target. It could be a Home Depot. It could be a Walmart, but one of those big box stores. And in it, you expect certain things when you walk through the door. When you walk through the door of a Walmart, what do you expect to see? All right, don't you expect to see kind of well, besides the old guy greeting you at the door, right? You expect to see a beehive of activity, lots of stuff on the shelves, all right? People coming and going, and you expect a certain level of activity when you walk through the doors. Years ago, up in Maine, they used to have a box store, and it was called Ames. Anybody ever remember the old Ames department store? All right, a few people did. I think Walmart put Ames out of business, all right? And so they did one of those 20% off, 30% off, 60% off, 90% off deals going out of business. So we would go there every week or so when they would lower the discount, and week after week there was less and less on the shelf. Finally, we went in when it was 90% off. And one of my kids, who was very little, about 6 years old at the time, we walked through the door. And at the 90% off level, the counters are kind of hanging over. There's little things hanging off. There's nobody in the store. She walked through the door, and she looked around, and she said, "This is creeping me out. We need to get out of here." And I thought, now that's an interesting way to describe it, because I felt kind of creepy too. But she said, "This is creeping me out. We got to get out of here." What was so creepy? What was bothering her? Here's what was going on. She was witnessing or experiencing a death. You see? Now, the store is not a living thing, but it has a certain energy to it, doesn't it? And as you go in and it's not what you expect, in fact, it's the exact opposite of what you expect, you get a kind of, your spirit is disturbed by that. And so we turned around and we went out and we never went back again. The place went out of business. They bulldozed it and they built a Walmart there, of all things. Think about that picture now, and let's apply it to the moral conscience inside of each one of us. You know, when I have a relationship with you, I get to know you. There are certain things that should be there in place. When you open up the door of your heart, or I should see a certain amount of activity. There should be the love of Christ and some other things there. There should be a well-stocked moral conscience. All of the shelves in your moral conscience should have things like honesty, integrity, respect, love, compassion, consideration, loyalty. All those things, need to be on the shelf. But what if there's not much on the shelf? Or what's there is kind of low quality. Now think about it. When I was a kid growing up in Detroit, I shared with you that I had respect on the shelf. But the quality of respect I had was very low. It was the kind of respect that you earned with your fists. It didn't apply anyplace else other than when you were a kid on the streets of Detroit. And so I needed to replace that low-quality respect with a high-quality biblical respect. Does that make sense to you? All right? So we're encountering more and more people that just have less and less on the shelf, and it's creeping us out. You look at somebody and you say, that's kind of bizarre. I wonder what's going on inside there. Why did you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Again, they're driven by the why not question because there's not much on the shelf. So that's the picture of the moral mart. Now, in the middle of the page, what is the moral mart? The moral mart is that place where decisions are made. It's a type of moral warehouse. Several major decision-making components are stored in the moral warehouse. Decisions are produced when the mind, that is the thinking, and the heart, that is your feeling, consult the conscience, that standard of morality, to determine a course of action. I want you to picture your moral conscience as a giant Walmart store, and I just described that to you. There needs to be lots of good quality stuff on the shelves. That's where my illustration falls apart. I'm not sure that there's all that great high quality stuff at Walmart, but maybe we want to do a Neiman Marcus or some expensive store like that, okay? And now, at the bottom, the goal is to eliminate the poor quality stuff from the shelves and replace it with the high quality, virtuous stuff. How do we do that? How do we live proactively and not reactively? And you might be asking that question at this point. All right, Pastor, I see this, and I'm with you on the two trees thing, and yeah, I'm living on the reactive tree too much. All right, how do I do this? How do I become proactive? How do I change? How do you restock your moral warehouse with the high-quality, virtuous stuff instead of the poor-quality we stuff or me stuff? Well, let's begin by looking at the Decision Depot model so that we may gain insight into the decision-making process. Once we understand how and why decisions are made, then we can appreciate virtuous decision-making. We must also understand the various lenses through which we view the decision-making process. Decisions are made in only two directions after having been viewed through one of three lenses. Now, if you're confused, that's okay. I'm going to clarify it for you. I'm going to draw out for you what I mean by all of this. I'm going to actually get the page here. All right, and we'll put it up on the screen. There's your Decision Depot page. Towards the bottom, you have kind of a dashed line. And here's what I want you to do. And yesterday, I noticed that there were some who were, I've got them here. I noticed that there were some that weren't drawing out the illustrations. What I want you to do is draw out these illustrations and keep them in your syllabus, especially the faculty. Why? You're going to use these again in the future. There'll be tools that you use. You're going to come across somebody who is just being highly reactive, and you're going to say, hey, you know what? You know what we need to do? We need to sit and draw out those two trees again and walk through the proactive, reactive tree, and then have them point to the tree that most describes or best describes their behavior. That's a moment of ownership and a very simple 15-minute illustration that will help you do that. This is another one. And so faculty and staff, for those of you who have teenagers and you're pulling your hair out, all right, with your teenagers, this illustration I'm going to give you will be life-changing for you and also for them. So let me get ahead of you a little bit and then catch up with me on it. But I'm going to start drawing below the line, and underneath the line represents the inner person. And above the line is the outer person. And I'm going to draw a little stick figure heart down at the bottom. All right? And that little stick figure heart represents the mind. And we use those two expressions interchangeably, the heart and the mind. All right, we do that quite often. The scriptures do that, in fact. And so I'm going to draw a straight line up from the mind right up until about this point on the page, and I'm going to draw a big circle. And that circle is going to represent what I call the Decision Depot. What is the Decision Depot? That's your moral conscience. What does the line represent? This is your thinking. Thinking goes through a process. You have thoughts that you keep to yourself, the inner person. You just kind of debate and wrestle with them yourself. But at some point, if you act out on them or you express them in some way, then it becomes part of the outer person. And so the thinking goes through that process. But as thinking goes through that process, it is filtered through one, two, or all three of these different lenses or filters. I don't know how well you can see those. I'm going to keep with the purple here. All right. The first is the filter of the thinker. The second is the filter of the feeler. And the third is the filter of the doer. You know, there's lots of books out there about personality types and everything. It gets pretty confusing to me after a while. I'm a simple kind of guy. I just like to do it this way. Thinkers, feelers, and doers. Three types of folks in the world. And let me describe to you the difference between them. Now, some of you are real heavily weighted in one area and not the other two. The goal here, as a well-balanced believer, is to be a balance of all three: thinker, feeler, and doer. When I started pastoring 8 or 9 years ago, I had to balance out in these areas because I'm an off-the-scale doer. All right? I'm an idea guy. Doers will drive you crazy. All right? Doers have 12 projects started at their house, and they don't ever finish any of them. Do you know what I'm talking about? All right? And but doers are dream people. They come home, and once I was reading an article in a magazine about how you could sell your house, you could buy a boat, right? Live offshore, save the tax money, and in 5 years have enough money to own the boat and buy your house back. Does that sound like a great idea, or what? All right? To a doer, that's terrific. And so I'm driving home. I can't wait to tell the fair and lovely Mrs. Scheibner. I walk through the door, and I go, honey, guess what? I go, we're going to sell the house and buy a boat. My wife is a thinker. All right? Now, when you drop a bomb, actually, when you just ask a question to a thinker, here's what happens. You ask them a question, and their head does this. It tips off about 25 degrees, and their mouth goes open. And there's nothing. If they were a pinball machine, it would say tilt on their forehead, right? So if you're a thinker or you're associated or in a relationship with a thinker, you're getting a little bit of insight to what's going on. What's going on inside the thinker at that moment? Remember when you were a little kid and it was a rainy day and you'd get the dominoes out and you'd line up all the dominoes and then you'd go to the first one and you'd knock it over and it would take a little time to knock over all the dominoes, okay? That's what's going on inside the brain of a thinker. Thinkers have dominoes inside their brain and they line them all up. Everything's got to be organized. Thinkers are very highly organized people. They're the kind of people that when you go into their garage, there's an outline of the ladder on the wall. When you open up the drawers, there's little outlines where all the tools go, okay? I'm kind of describing Dr. Burgraff right now, if you understand what I mean, okay? And so everything's in its place, and he's great, terrific. But they got dominoes. And so when you ask them a question, you just go and you push over that first domino, and then all of the dominoes have to fall. All right. So I came in once and I said to my wife, she had been baking an apple pie for me in the afternoon, and she was going to surprise me that evening. And I thought, I love this woman. I'll take her out to dinner tonight. And she had dinner already thawing and preparing to cook, and we homeschool our children. I'm giving you some of the dominoes that are about to fall here. And so I came home, and of course, doers are spontaneous people. We don't plan anything out, right? We just like spontaneity. So I walked through the door and said, honey, let's go out to dinner tonight. And I'm used to it now. So I'm just sitting there, I'm waiting, and she's processing. About 20 seconds later, she pops back up and she says, no. Right? Many times out of a thinker, that's going to be their first response. You get no. So to a doer, doers have very short attention spans. I've forgotten what the question is in 20 seconds. I'm like, no what? No, we can't go out to dinner. Why? We have to go on vacation. Honey, we don't go on vacation until June. It's September. Now, here's what happened, all right? The first domino went like this. I said, honey, let's go out to dinner. She's got dinner thawing. She's got the apple pie baking. She has to finish the apple pie baking, and then we can take it out of the oven. It's going to cool. It'll be okay on its own, but this other stuff that we're thawing, we can't put it back in the freezer. It's got to get cooked, so that's going to take a little bit of time, which means we'll go out to dinner later tonight. If we do go out to dinner later tonight, the laundry that we were going to get done tonight won't get done tonight. It's got to get done tomorrow morning. All right? So we put that off till tomorrow morning. Wait a minute. Homeschooling starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, which means we won't be able to start at least until 9 or 9:30. Oh, we've got a doctor's appointment. It costs us $25 if we cancel it. If we cancel that doctor's appointment and we push off homeschooling until later on in the afternoon, oh, I got something tomorrow afternoon as well, that means we're going to miss an entire day of homeschooling if we go out to dinner tonight. If we miss an entire day of homeschooling, that means that we won't get our 175 days in the year. And if we don't get our 175 days in the year, we won't be able to go on vacation in June. Wow. I didn't realize I caused so much trouble. I just wanted to go out to dinner. All right? Now, she's gotten to be a lot better over the years, and I've gotten to be a lot better. I pre-activity my wife about things like that, and she processes a whole lot better. But that's, gentlemen, ladies, if you've ever come across that sort of thing, that's what's going on. You just pushed over that first domino, and all of that stuff is connected. Now, how about the feeler? All right? The feeler is that person who wants to make sure that everybody is included and that everybody is considered in whatever is going on. And very, very important aspect. I have about 8 or 9 really strong feelers in my church. And every Sunday morning after the morning message, I'm back there shaking hands. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for coming. They'll come. They always grab my hand with two hands. You know that person? They grab my hand like that. They're shaking my hand. They go, Pastor, that was the best sermon I ever heard. All right? Now, I know that's not possible. You can't improve the process week after week after week. At some point, you're going to have a dud. You know, your baseball team doesn't win every game, right? But they're very nice. And Pastor, that's the best sermon I ever heard. So one week, this one lady who was a feeler but a little bit of a smart aleck, I was sharing that story with the church. I said, you know, I really appreciate my feelers and I appreciate how you encourage me and I really enjoy that. But, you know, I know that I can't improve the process every week. And that week, it just so happened that we had a guest speaker in. And so I didn't even give the sermon that week. We had a guest gave the sermon. And so we're both back there shaking hands, saying goodbye to people after his message. And this feeler comes up and she shakes my hand like this and she goes, Pastor, I just wanted to say that was the best sermon I ever heard. Thanks a lot. Okay? So thinkers, feelers, and doers. All right, the last thing on thinkers, feelers, and doers. Here you go. You're having a campfire and somebody suggests making s'mores. All right, here's how thinkers and feelers and doers would attack the s'more thing. The doer goes out and gets all of the wood and the kindling and makes this blazing fire. The doers are always stoking the fire and they're paying attention to that aspect of it. And the doer will get any old marshmallow out of the bag, stick it on any old stick, stick it in the fire until it blazes, and just blow it out, stick it in their mouth, and that's a s'more to them. All right, that's a doer. A thinker now, thinkers detach from everybody else at the cookout. They go through the bag of marshmallows and they examine each marshmallow. No, that one's a little lumpy. No, that one's a little... Oh, that's perfect. It's the TV marshmallow. They get the TV marshmallow. Then they go and they research the perfect stick. It's got to have enough flex in it. It's got to be not too thick, not too thin. They whittle it down just right. And then they put the marshmallow on the end of the stick just at the right distance. Then they sit there by the edge of the fire, and you've seen them. They rotate, right? You know what I'm talking about? They rotate the marshmallow because it's got to be a perfect golden brown. All right? Meanwhile, if the doer ever gets wind of what's going on with the thinker, the doer comes over with his big old, 2x4 stick and just smacks the other one and knocks it into the fire for fun. And then the thinker has to start, remember the dominoes? They have to start all over again at the beginning. All right, it's good sport. It really is a lot of fun. But so they're doing this thing, and the kids are like, Dad, will you come and play with me? Leave me alone, kid. You know, I'm making the perfect marshmallow. So they got that thing, and I've got a friend who's such a thinker. He takes his graham cracker and he puts the chocolate on it. He puts it on a rock next to the fire so he melts the chocolate just right. All right, he gets his perfect marshmallow. He puts it right in the middle. He squeezes the thing down so it comes out all four edges perfectly, and then he enjoys it. The kid's like, Dad, can I have a bite of your s'more? No. Right? He's going to eat this whole thing because it's the perfect thing. The thinker obsesses over that. The feeler, what's the feeler doing at the bond roast? The feeler is going around making sure everybody's got marshmallows, everybody's got sticks, everybody's included, all the kids got all the makings. Right? They're making sure that everybody's included. All right? It's really a neat thing when it all works together. What we need to be is a blend of all three of these things. The thinking process goes through one, two, or all three of these filters. You've got to look at yourself and say, hey, you know what? Am I off the scale in one area or another? Because if you are, you need to make an adjustment. Now, the thinking then goes through that process. Where does it end up? It ends up in the decision depot. What's in the decision depot? The decision depot is that place where all of those core values that we mentioned last night, that's where they live. This is where the shelves are. All right, so things like honesty, integrity, respect, courage, all right, commitment, justice, all right, you see how this, diligence, and I'm not going to draw them all in here, but you can see that's going to fill up pretty quickly. The thinking goes into the moral conscience and consults the moral conscience. If there's nothing on the shelf, there is a default. But if there's something on the shelf, then it makes a decision. And the decision is to go in one of two directions. You're either going to choose to elevate God, and I'm going to write underneath here virtue, because we've been talking about that. You're either going to elevate God and virtue, or you're going to elevate, anybody know what belongs over here? Self. Elevate self or feelings. Now watch this very carefully. The decision to elevate self, these are choices that start out easy, but they make life harder. The choices to elevate God are hard choices that eventually make life easier. Look at that. Does that describe you and I and how we make decisions? Let me give you an example of stuff that is easy that makes life harder. Is it easy to get a credit card? Oh, it's really easy. They send it to you. And then they tell you, you've got to establish a credit history. You need this. You have to have it. Everybody else has one. It can make life harder very quickly. You'll max that thing out, and all of a sudden you're making minimum payments, and your credit is shot. Is it easy to be someplace where there's some drug and alcohol being used? The rationalization goes like this. Well, I want to win them for Christ. I want to fit in. You know, I'll have a better opportunity to witness with them. I'm not really drinking the beer. I'm just walking around with it. You know how I can say that? Because I used to do that. I used to do that nonsense. I used to walk around saying, you know what? Whether you drank it or not, everybody assumes that you're drunk at the party. Those are easy choices. Easy to get behind the wheel of a car when you shouldn't. Easy to break a rule. Easy to look the other way, especially if the RA is doing it. Hey, the RA is doing it. Why should I do it? Those choices are easy, but eventually, ultimately, they make life harder. What are some hard choices now that make life easier? Well, buckling down, taking the rules seriously, saving for the future, choosing wisely a mate. We're attracted to certain people, but you know what? It's the character qualities that make for a great marriage. It's easy to run off with the wrong person. It's harder to make those character quality type of choices. It's harder to elevate virtues above feelings. This path over here is the reactive route. It's the one that reactive people take all the time. This one is the proactive path. It's harder. I don't want you to get the impression that what we're talking about here or what we're going to ask of you is easy. It's hard. It takes work. You're going to have to dig in and make some hard choices in life. But the hard choices eventually make life easier. When I was a mission commander on a crew, it means I was in charge of the crew, and there was about 15 of us all together, and I was a lieutenant at the time. We showed up, and it was an 8 o'clock brief that morning. We were going to take off at 10 o'clock. We had a 6-hour mission to fly. And that morning, one of my computer operators in the back of the airplane showed up, and he didn't show up. I didn't see him at first. And I was looking for him. I couldn't find him. I went outside to do my pre-flight walk around the outside of the airplane, and there he was, leaned up against the tire of the airplane like this with his tongue hanging out. He wasn't thinking, all right? There he was, completely passed out. And I went by and I smelled him, and he was drunk. This is 8 o'clock in the morning. And so the senior enlisted on the crew came to me right away, and he said, "Sir, he's had a little bit too much to drink last night." He said, we've been together for 2.5 years now. He said, this is the first time he's ever drank. He doesn't have any problem with this. Would you mind just looking the other way? We'll just throw him in the back of the airplane. We don't even really need him today. We'll throw some coffee down his throat. But if you do something, if you let somebody know, it's going to ruin his career. All right? Now look at where I am right now. I'm presented with a moral dilemma. I can either respond reactively or I can respond proactively. That's the choice I've got to make right now. Guess what? Tag, you're it. So I thought about it, and I debated back and forth. And you know what? I liked that guy, and I liked everybody on that crew, and I wanted to be liked. That's how I felt about it. Had I elevated feelings above virtues at that moment, I would have decided to throw that guy in the back of the airplane. But after about 30 minutes of deliberating with it, I went back to the senior enlisted guy in the crew, and I said, I can't do it. We got to send him over for what they call a fitness for duty physical, which means they take blood, alcohol, and all that stuff, and we're going to have to make a stink out of this. So we did. His blood alcohol was 0.17, all right? I mean, he was 2 or 3 times the legal limit. He had been drinking until about 6 o'clock in the morning, and the crew was so upset with me that they didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Every time we'd go on a flight, they wouldn't talk to me. If we'd go someplace and we were staying overnight, the van would come to pick us up. They would hurry up. They'd quickly get their jobs done. They'd jump in the van and they'd take off and strand me. They were shunning me. They were so upset with me. And I really felt awful about that. I had made a hard choice, and it wasn't making life easier. It seemed as though it was making life harder, which in the short term, as we look at those things, we go, you know what? I made a hard choice once, and it just made life harder. It's kind of what I call the tithing mentality of life. I tried tithing for 3 weeks. It was really hard to do that. And you know what? My car broke down in that 3-week period. You know, God He doesn't bless you. He won't in the first 3 weeks. Let me tell you how long it takes sometimes. We sent that guy off. I ended up that set of orders. I went someplace else. I got out of the active duty Navy. I joined the Reserve Navy. 8 years later, in 1996, I'm walking down the hallway, I'm walking down the hallway of a brand new squadron, a brand new command down in Pennsylvania, and this fella is walking towards me. And you know when somebody makes lock-on with you with their eyes? And you're like, I don't know who this is, but they're going to come and talk to me. So he's coming down the hallway, and he's got lock-on, and he's coming towards me, and I don't exactly recognize at first who it is. And then as he gets a little bit closer, I recognize it. It's the guy I sent over for the physical. It's been 8 years since I've seen him. And he comes over to me, and he says this. He says, "Sir, I've been looking for you." I thought, here it is, school shooting. I need to take it like a man, you know. But he stuck out his hand like that, and so I grabbed his hand and I shook it, and he said, "I just wanted to say thank you." He said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, I had a drinking problem. He said, I was an alcoholic, and he said, I kept it very well hidden. Nobody knew. He said, but for 8 years, for a number of years, he said, I had this problem. He said, that particular night, my wife had called me on the phone, and she said, if you don't stop drinking, I am going to leave you. What was his answer to that dilemma? To drink even more. So he got himself so drunk, he got caught, and he said, you were the first one to do anything about it. He said, it took me 2 years to dry out after that initial episode. He said, but for the last 6 years, I've been sober. He said, I kept my marriage. I have 4 lovely children now. My life is back on track. And he said, you were the first one to step in and do something about it. Do you know what was driving me at that moment? Was a desire to elevate virtues above feelings. Everything in my person said, just throw them in the back of the airplane. These guys are going to love you forever. You're going to be the hero of this crew. And I would have ruined a life and ruined a family had I not elevated virtues above feelings. At that moment of decision, you can't see the whole big picture. But I'll guarantee you this. If you consistently elevate virtues above feelings, God will be your protector. God will be your defender. God will see you through. You see, He has the big picture, and He wants us to live like this. Does this make sense to you? So you've got to, again, one more time, examine yourself in this illustration and say, how often do I make the easy choice, and in the long run it makes life harder? And how often do you make hard choices that make life easier? You've got to make some decisions. We need to raise the standard, and this is what it looks like. If you got your Bible with you in the last couple of minutes, let's turn to Exodus chapter 17. Say, Pastor, we haven't looked at the Bible much. We're going to now, but we needed to lay this foundation. Exodus chapter 17. Say, give me the biblical mandate for raising the standard. You keep talking about that. Is it Bible? It is. Exodus chapter 17, starting in verse 8. We're dealing with an episode with Moses. You might be familiar with this one, where Moses raises the staff, right? They're fighting the Amalekites, the Israelites. And Moses raises the staff. And as long as he has the staff raised, what happens? They win. What happens when the staff gets lowered? They lose. All right? But after a while, it gets kind of hard to hold that staff up. The staff could have another name. The staff is also known as a standard. The standard bearer in front of a military unit is the person who stands there with the staff that has the flag on it. That man, that individual, is known as the standard bearer. Usually they pick the best soldier out of the unit to be the standard bearer. You, my friends, are the standard bearer for the Lord Jesus Christ. You are stewards. Do you realize that? You carry the standard throughout this town, back to your family, every relationship that you have. You carry the standard of God with you. So the Lord says, I want you to hold that standard high because we need to fight against the flesh. Now, the Amalekites were the descendants of, who were the Amalekites the descendants of? Anybody know? One fellow. Remember Esau from the Old Testament? What was Esau known for? Esau sold his birthright for a pot of stew. Esau was driven by the flesh. Esau was a very fleshy guy. He didn't elevate virtues above feelings. He felt hungry at the moment, and so he threw out his birthright. It was very disrespectful, very dishonoring to his father and his family. He threw it out for a bowl of all things. Lentil stew. I hate lentils. Right? But he did that. He elevated feelings above virtue, and his whole family line became known as people who were fleshy. Take the word Amalekite here and just interject the word flesh and see what meaning this passage gives you. I'm going to start in verse 8, and I'm going to do that for you. Here it goes. Then came the flesh and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose on us out men and go and fight the flesh. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with the flesh. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, the flesh prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, and to one on one side and one on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited the flesh and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in the book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of the flesh from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. And he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with the flesh. Look at this last expression, very important for us today. From generation to generation. Here's what he's saying to you and I today. The war against the flesh will never end until Jesus Christ returns. You and I fight against the Amalekites today. That war of the flesh depends on how high we raise the standard. At first, you can raise the standard yourself, but you know what? You won't be able to keep it there without help from your friends. Young people are all into community today. You have a wonderful community today. You have close friends. You'll protect your friends over and over and over again to a fault. Why don't we change that? And why don't we help our friends hold up that high standard that God wants us to hold up? If we do, we will defeat the flesh in this generation, and God will do some fantastic things through you and I. I wish I had more time. All right, my friends, that's enough for our brains this morning. I'm going to ask Dr. Burgraff to come back up. I will see you tonight for more good stuff.